In this screencast on mining, we are going to look at the risk to miners who go underground or do subsurface mining. So first, there is a serious risk of accidental burial, explosions, and fires. So picture what's down in there. It's coal, but also mixed in with the coal are various other gases that those alone could deplete the amount of oxygen and cause the miner to not have enough oxygen to breathe. That's why the old adage about the bringing a canary in a coal mine, because the birds have much smaller lungs and are more sensitive. So if your canary keels over, if your bird keels over, then there is not enough oxygen for you to survive and you need to get out of there too. Explosions, many of these gases are volatile, meaning they're prone to explosion, and fires, because some of these gases are, again, volatile, prone to fire, as is the coal itself. So between 1900 and 2006, in the United States, there were 11,000 coal miners who died of either accidental burial, explosions, or fires. There was a very large mining fire in Pennsylvania. It's called the Centralia Fire. It was in 1962, and it's thought that it may continue to burn for about 100 more years because there's so much fuel to continue to feed the fire. When that happens, there is a concern about ground subsidence. In other words, the ground collapsing and possibly releasing some of the gases into the atmosphere. So nowadays there's also a greater risk, even more than the accidental burial, explosions, and fires. We have a high risk of respiratory diseases from inhaling gases and particles. Let me go back one. Okay, so one of the most common respiratory diseases is known as black lung disease. Black lung disease is a result of inhaling small particles of coal and also gases. So I'm going to show you a slide from the CDC on the next slide, and it will show you what the trend was as regulations were put into place to control the rate of respiratory diseases from occurring in miners. So these lines in different colors represent how long a miner had been working at doing a mine. CWP is the proper term for coal workers. I've forgotten how to pronounce that, but basically lung disease or black lung disease. And we're looking in this slide at the tenure or how long the people had worked in coal mining. And you can see back in 1970-74, there were very high rates of black lung disease, and this is only category 1 or greater. And obviously, the longer someone had worked as a coal worker, the higher the rate of disease. And you can also see that there was a very year after year decline, so that by the time we got to the period of time between 1995 and 1999, the prevalence of black lung disease dropped below 5%, even for people who had been working in this field for 25 or more years. So that was really fantastic, and that was a result of legislation that required, or regulation I should say, that required certain respiratory gear, which was improved over the years so that the miners would not be breathing in these coal dust particles and gases. Unfortunately, as you can see, the number didn't decline or go to zero. In fact, there was an uptick in about 2000-2004 period. So about a decade after this, there was a definite uptick, particularly people who had worked 20 or 25 or more years as coal miners. So why did that happen? Well, there were a variety of causes. One of them is that the respiratory equipment is very hard to breathe through. It makes it difficult to breathe. And when a coal miner is in the mine and the coal dust is in the air, it often blocks or clogs up the filters. And that makes it even harder to breathe. So oftentimes what happens is a coal worker, it removes the respiratory gear that's meant to protect them, and then they no longer are protected. There are also some issues. This data was drawn from a government study where co-workers were offered a chance to have chest x-rays to look at the progression of black lung disease. Some people chose not to participate because if you do have a case of black lung disease, then you can't really continue to work in the mines. That would be against the regulations. They don't want you to get sicker. And so that could mean for a person who, say, had worked in the field for, let's say, 20 years. Maybe they started when they were 20, they're now 40. Their risk has ticked up. If they have black lung disease, what are they going to do for employment, for income after they're diagnosed? So it's very possible that the numbers are even higher than is listed here on this slide from the CDC. Okay, so this further documents the risk of doing subsurface removal of coal. However, mountaintop removal of coal, though it doesn't have as many dangers to the miners themselves, it can have more significant impacts on the environment than subsurface mining. Okay, so we have a limited supply. We now know it's harmful to humans and the environment, and we have to also consider the disposal. So what are the main points that are harmful to humans or the environment, and then what can we do about it? So we'll start with the destruction of habitat. That's a big one for mountaintop removal. There's a lot of destruction of habitat. If I can skip down here to this bottom point, outdated legislation. Most of this legislation comes from about 1885, and it's very outdated, unfortunately. So there is current regulation, that insists on reclamation of mountains that were destroyed by mountaintop removal. However, so that's requiring that the mining company put the dirt back in place to the mountain and plant some trees, hopefully the same type that had been there originally, and try to reclaim or do a reclamation of the mountaintop. Excuse me. So in some areas there has been reclamation. However, many mining companies work through a loophole where they declare bankruptcy, and therefore bankruptcy under a particular name of a company. And then once they declare bankruptcy, they're no longer obligated to reclaim the mountain because they have no money to do so. And then they pop back up later, excuse me, as another mining company with a different name. So those workarounds, those loopholes still need to be managed. So many of these other points we've already discussed. There's waste rock that often ends up in valleys and streams and rivers, blocks the streams and rivers, and can cover the valley that might have had fertile soil with waste rock. Dust is a problem for both surface mining and subsurface mining. Toxic chemicals in waste rock and chemical treatment lead to having lead, mercury, and cyanide in the waste rock and also in the tailings, and then that can damage wildlife. You can have land collapses, you can have acid mine drainage, and black lung disease, which we talked about. Asbestosis is the breathing in of mineral fibers that are existing side by side with a coal and leading to asbestosis. Accidental burial, explosions, and fires, which you've mentioned. And many of these coal mining companies The coal mining may be taking place on private land that's purchased. It may also be taking place on government land. And there are also subsidies often provided, as there are for many other fossil fuels. So we want to look briefly at an example, the real price of gold. So I'm turning away from coal right now and talking about gold. To produce 2 wedding rings from the ground, from extraction of gold from the ground, produces 6 tons of mining waste, or basically 3 mid-sized sedans. And nowadays, gold is not present in sufficient quantities to just take a chunk of gold. It exists as veins through rocks. You've probably seen rocks with veins in it and can picture what I'm talking about here. So first they crush up the rock that may contain some gold. Then they spray it with a acid cyanide, and that acid cyanide causes the gold to be released from the rock, or dissolved from the rock. And then there's a tremendous amount, after the gold is removed, there's a tremendous amount of liquid remaining, and that's drained into settling ponds. Birds and other wildlife don't realize that it's toxic, and cyanide is toxic, and they can drink from the water or feed from those waters, and that kills them. And it's a law of diminishing returns. The more we extract gold from this rock that's laced with it, the less and less return we get. There's less and less veins of gold in this rock. So it's really not going to be sustainable for the future. And because the quantity of gold has decreased, that means the price of it went up. So it's led to 2 forms of recycled gold. One is to take the gold, have someone turn in the gold that they already have in, let's say, a bracelet or earrings or rings, and to melt it down and produce new gold jewelry. So that's one step better than extracting it from the earth. But even better is if you can have antique gold that a person can buy that's the original gold setting without doing anything to it, putting in no more acids, no more energy, simply accepting the setting as it is. Okay, we will take a last look here at, oops, there we go. This is a gold mine. Usually gold mines are nowadays subsurface, but this one happens to be surface mining. And the gold is extracted from rock. It goes through that process of crushing and then adding the acid cyanide. And you can see here the tailings, the pool of wastewater that is attractive to birds and other wildlife. And you can also see the risk of one of these man-made lined pools either having a breach that allows this toxic material to get into groundwater, or even having this wall break and a spill occur. So neither of these are situations that you want to have. All right, let's see. What else can we do here? So we can decrease the environmental and human health consequences by substituting, recycling, reusing materials. Those are 3 of the top priorities. We can also improve mining and manufacturing processes. We can slow population growth, so the less population we have, the less demand we have for these materials. We can use economic incentives. Basically, governments can use economic incentives or disincentives, and we can improve regulations that require environmental restoration. So I will end it here, but be sure to review the key concepts from the chapter, including the fact that the resources that are available were determined when the planet was formed. The Earth is constantly changing, and obtaining and using mineral resources has had social and environmental consequences. Be sure to answer the open response question about the types of mining and look at the impacts of mining on the environment and human health.